two things before we start. One, this is a cover of a part of a lecture of Jordan Peterson. So the text is mostly his, but I've also changed a few things. So this means it's probable that we both do not totally agree with everything I will say. So judge the ideas for yourself. Two, currently I have about 100 subscribers. That means that you are about 10,000 times more important to me than you are to someone with 1 million subscribers. So, thank you. Let's start. Creativity seems related to IQ in that people with higher IQs are more likely to be creative, and the other way around. If you take people who are creative, there's a high probability that they'll have a high IQ. But there's more to creativity than IQ, of course. But that depends on how you define it, obviously. You could define it, creativity, as the sum of total creative achievements that you've made in your life, which would be the actual production of, say artifacts. So performances, inventions, artworks, or what have you. Or you could define it as just the proclivity to engage in creative thought. What does it mean to think creatively? Imagine that I toss you an idea. There's some probability that that idea will trigger other ideas in your imagination. If you're not very creative, I'll throw you an idea and hardly any other ideas will be triggered. And the ones that will be triggered are going to be very closely related to the initial idea. So let's say I toss a group of people an idea and I ask them to tell me the first thing that comes to mind. What we would see is that the first thing that comes to mind for one would be shared by many others. Okay, so then you can think about that as a common response, right? And so we say that that is a less creative response. And then on the other side, there'll be some things that come to mind for you that are so idiosyncratic to you as a person that only you can think that and no one else can even understand it. Well, that's not also exactly creative, because for something to be creative, it has to be novel and useful at the same time. Useful in the sense that it shows your ability to follow certain constraints and direct your thoughts to a goal. So that they are not just random. That is sort of a rough definition for creativity. Something creative is novel and useful. But obviously, there is a certain amount of judgment that goes along with that. Because if it's very useful in theory and also really novel, it might be so novel that no one else can understand it, which in turn would make it unlikely to be actually useful, since you probably need other people to accomplish your goals. So, if we want to decide if a thought is creative, I could say to a group, okay, in the next 3 minutes, I want you to write down as many uses for a brick as you can think of. Imagine if we gathered the responses. A bunch of the entries would be the same and some people would come up with something different. So, you'll get a graph of the probability of a response, and the more probable, the less creative, roughly speaking. We call that the originality. Originality would be how improbable your use was compared to the uses generated by other people. So, you get thrown an idea and there's some probability that it will activate other ideas. And if it activates ideas that are quite distant from the original ideas, and you would track that distance by comparing it to the probability that the other people also had generated it, then that's originality, which is an indication of creativity. But, as I said earlier, that's not the only criteria. To rank the entries of people, the first thing I would do is just to figure out how many uses someone has generated. That's called fluency. If I had an IQ measure of a person and I had a measure of how many words he's generated, IQ plus the number of words would be a better predictor of his creativity than just IQ. So there's also a fluency element, which is like the rate at which you can produce verbal ideas. So that's creative thinking. But then creative achievement, which would be the ability to take those original ideas and then also actually implement them in the world. And that's obviously very different than just being able to think creatively. You hear people very frequently say things like, everyone is creative. It's wrong. It's just as wrong as saying that everyone is extroverted. First of all, you have to be pretty damn smart to be creative, because otherwise you're just going to think of things that other people have already thought of. And, well, that's not creative by its definition. Creative people are really different than non-creative people, you know? Partly because they are highly motivated to do creative things and to experience novelty and to chase down aesthetic experiences, to attend movies and to read fiction and to go to museums and to enjoy poetry and to enjoy music that's not conventional music, for example. And these aren't trivial differences, and so it's a real misstatement to say that everyone is creative. It's simply not the case. It's a matter of wishful thinking. It's like saying that everyone is intelligent. No, everyone has intelligence. It's like, well, if everyone is intelligent, then the term loses all of its meaning, because any term that you can apply to every member of a category has absolutely no meaning. But now, don't be thinking that creativity is therefore such a good thing. It's a high-risk, high-return strategy. If you are creative, you are going to have a hell of a time monetizing your creativity. It's really difficult because, first of all, let's say you make an original product. You think that the world will beat a pathway to your door if you build a better mousetrap or something? That's complete rubbish. That isn't true in the slightest. If you make a good, creative product, you've probably solved about 5% of your problem, because then you have marketing, which is insanely difficult, and then you have sales, and then you have customer support, and then you have to build an organization, and if it's really novel, you have to tell people what the hell the thing is. So take a book. It's going to be published by a big publisher. What do you think the royalty for an author of a book is? So you make something creative and you get a percentage of the sale. Yeah, it's like 5%. So think about that. That means that you make your thing and 95% of it belongs to someone else. And that's when things are going quite well for you and you get your book published in the first place, which is, well, that never happens. And well, it really doesn't matter what you manufacture or produce, if it's books or if it's music or if it's anything else. 5% is about what you can expect. Sales, marketing, distribution, it eats it all up. So, if you wrote a book, well, then you have a problem that another million people have also written a book. But on the other side, if you produce something that is completely new and doesn't have a category, people can't search for it. How are they going to find it? And then you have pricing problems, because if there's nothing to compare it to, it's really, really unbelievably difficult to produce something creative and then monetize it. And even worse, if you are the creative person, let's say you have a spectacular invention. You've got no money, right? You've got no customers. And those are big problems. And so maybe you go and you find an investor. We start with family and friends, of course, because, well, that's how it works. You raise money from them. But that's assuming you have family and friends that have some money and that they are going to give it to you. Well, most people aren't in that situation, so it's a terrible barrier right off the bat. Then, let's say you get past family and friends and you get an angel investor in some miraculous manner, because that's also very, very hard. Well, how much of your product is that person going to take? Most of it! Most of it. And no wonder this person is going to take basically all of your business because, you know, you don't have any money. How are you going to bargain for control of your product? He'll just say, well, do you want the money or not? And if you answer as no, then he'll just go and do something else with his money. It's not like there's another billion things that you can do with your money. And then later, if you get a venture capitalist involved, they'll take another big chunk. And maybe if they're not very strict with you, they'll just throw you out, because at that point in the company's development, you're nothing but a pain in the neck. Because what do you know about marketing, sales, customer service, building a business, having an organization? You don't have a clue. So yeah, even if you're successful at generating any idea and you put it into a business, the probability that you, as the originator of the idea, are going to make some money from it is very, very low. So don't be thinking that creativity is such a something that you would necessarily want to curse yourself with. It's really a high-risk strategy. The overwhelming probability is that you will fail. And a small proportion of creative people succeed spectacularly. So yeah, it's like a lottery in some sense. You are probably going to lose, but if you don't lose, you could win very big. And well, that keeps a lot of creative people going. But also, they don't really have much choice, because if you are a creative person, you're like a fruit tree that's bearing fruit, you know? Creative people, if creative people are not creative, they are miserable. So they basically have to do it. And then, you know, it's not all bad, because it opens up avenues of experience for creative people that aren't available for people who aren't creative. There's real joy and pleasure, and it's psychological utility, and well, it's not all bad, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an intelligent strategy. It's certainly not a conservative strategy for moving through your life. If you happen to be creative, find a way to make money and then practice your craft on the side, because otherwise you will just starve to death. Now, for some of you that won't be the case, but that's a tiny minority. Your best bet is to find a job that will keep body and soul together, and then you can pass off some time that you can pursue your creative things in. As a medium to long-term strategy, it's a better one, on average. So I say, not everyone is creative, and then people say, oh no, that's terrible. Well, no, it's not terrible, because it's not self-evident that high levels of creativity are better on the individual level. Let me show you something interesting. Here is a creative achievement questionnaire. A 0 gives you no training or recognized talent in this area. Okay, so you really want to keep an eye out on these zeros, alright? And it goes up to, my work is being critiqued in national publications. Alright. So 0 to 7 points, but you can indicate more, because maybe that happened to you more than once. You might expect that it gets less and less common to get to the next step and to have that step happen to you multiple times. But interestingly, it's the other way around. The higher you are up this hierarchy, the more likely it is that those things have happened to you more than once. That's an example of this weird thing called Pareto principle, or Price's law, which is kind of like, as good things happen to you, the probability that more good things will happen to you increases. Right. So, because, well, once you're famous, people are going to give you all sorts of opportunities to do things, and which will make you more famous. So, yeah, your success isn't linear. It doesn't go like that. It goes like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, skyrocket. That is how it works. But getting from 0 to not 0, basically everyone stays at 0. Yeah, the thing is, you could say that all people are creative because all people could generate ideas, but the issue isn't whether or not you can generate ideas, it's whether or not you can generate ideas that are different from the ideas that other people already have generated and that they are useful. It has to be novel and useful. And if your idea that you generate is the same as the idea that a bunch of other people have already generated, it's an idea. Fair enough. And if you define creativity that way, then everyone is creative. But it's a foolish way of defining creativity because then it loses all of its meaning. Because then it loses all its of meaning. Words.